Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. The war on the ground in Ukraine is devastating. But before the ground offensive came a cyber attack that threatened Ukraine's government. That battle was fought right here in Washington. We'll talk with Seattle University School of Law professor Mark Chinen about what's at stake. But first, let's get you caught up. Representative Pramila Jayapal wants an investigation into possible criminal obstruction of Congress by Amazon. Jayapal and 4 other lawmakers sent a letter to the Justice Department yesterday asking to look into whether its top leaders lied to or misled Congress during its antitrust investigation. The letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland alleges that Amazon has engaged in a pattern of misleading conduct. An Amazon spokesperson disputed the charge and told the Seattle Times they've been cooperating in good faith. Seattle Public School students can go mask-free starting next week. SPS said yesterday that masks will be optional in school and on Seattle school buses starting Monday. The district is still encouraging people to wear them, and they'll also continue to monitor case counts. Governor Inslee left it to individual school districts to decide whether to keep imposing a mask mandate after the state's mandate ends Saturday. And the Mariners' 2022 season has been delayed again. Thanks to an ongoing labor dispute, play won't start until mid-April. MLB canceled 2 more series yesterday following another breakdown in its negotiation with players. If nothing changes, the M's will start the season with a homestand against the Astros on April 15th.
Yeah, when I think about what a company like ours does, what the tech sector needs to do and does do every day, it is fundamentally protect our customers around the world, whether they be individuals, NGOs, companies, or in this case, governments. Mm-hmm. And we need to protect them. We seek to protect them from attacks from others.
That was Microsoft President Brad Smith talking at the G0 presentation at the Munich Security Conference just a couple of weeks ago. As the war in Ukraine enters a 3rd week, we're seeing images of destruction, bombed out buildings, and tanks rolling through cities and towns. But here in Seattle, a local tech company is playing a role in another part of the conflict, less visible, but very critical. At the start of the Russian ground assault, Microsoft alerted U.S. national security teams about cyber attacks against the Ukrainian government. Mark Chinen is here to help us get a better picture of the situation. He's a professor at the Seattle University School of Law, where he teaches courses in artificial intelligence law and international business transactions. Mark, really appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you for having me.
So the malware attack that Microsoft detected was targeting government offices in Ukraine. They're calling it Foxblade. And in reading it, it sounds like it was an extremely intense situation that played out over a few hours. What was at risk and what is the latest?
Well, the information that we have is, based on disclosures made by Microsoft itself and then what we've read in the papers. Ukraine was subject to an attack in 2017 by forces associated with Russia. According to Microsoft's blog post on this topic, the current attacks are not quite as severe as those 2017 attacks, but obviously serious nonetheless, because they are geared towards parts of the Ukrainian government, financial institutions within the country, et cetera. And of course, the concern that there will be spillover effects into other countries.
And of course, we're talking about high-level attacks on government services. Brad Smith from Microsoft says they're involved in several ways defending Ukraine. Cybersecurity is one, but responding to disinformation and humanitarian assistance. They're trying to protect employees. There's a lot going on.
Indeed, there is. One is to respond to and assist the Ukrainian government with regard to those cyber attacks. The second is to respond to attempts to spread disinformation. That's primarily, my guess is, by not allowing Russian media, for example, to use Microsoft platforms or apps, et cetera, or make Russian media apps available on their websites. In that connection, other tech companies like Apple, Google, et cetera, have also announced that they're preventing disinformation campaigns by not allowing Russian media or other sources to use their channels for that communication. The third area is assisting Ukraine in its humanitarian efforts to address the grave need of Ukrainian citizens at this time. And then fourth is just trying to ensure the safety of Microsoft employees, so they're engaged in those kinds of activities.
What's interesting to me about this is, the balance of power here. The stakes are high for a company like Microsoft, who considers itself a compassionate player and also wields a huge amount of power and influence.
Yes, indeed. Just in the interest of disclosure, I should just let you know that Seattle University does receive some financial support from Microsoft in its programs on ethics and technologies. I'd like to point out one of the things that Brad Smith leads off with as he's describing Microsoft's activities in Ukraine. He says at the very outset that it's important to note that we, Microsoft, are a company and not a government or a country. And then continues by saying, in times like this, it's especially important for us, again, Microsoft, to work in consultation with those in government. And in this instance, our efforts, that is Microsoft's efforts in cybersecurity, have involved constant and close coordination with the Ukrainian government, as well as the European Union, European nations, the U.S. government, NATO, and the United Nations. So close quote. I think that statement is remarkable for a number of reasons. One is it is an acknowledgement that Microsoft is aware that the role it's playing seems to be an unusual one for a private company to be this closely involved in activities really which are raising international and national security concerns. This is enormously powerful, that even if all that Microsoft is doing is detecting these threats, sharing information, intelligence, and apparently advising the Ukrainian government about steps it can take to ward off these attacks. That's an extreme level of involvement. It speaks to the fact that even though Microsoft is not a country or government, Microsoft and other large tech companies have enormous influence because of the kinds of connections, the kinds of contacts they have with agencies that are perhaps even more engaged, certainly more engaged in responding to this crisis.
Mark, what about other companies? There's information and disinformation coming out of everywhere right now. I'm curious how other tech companies are managing it all.
Yes. So, for example, Google has said with regard to its cloud services, it's aware that in the current conflict that there might be an increase in cyber attacks on their cloud services, their databases, et cetera. And so they're simply disclosing to their customers and through their blog posts to the public about the steps they're trying to take to ensure that their databases, their services are not interrupted by these kinds of attacks. As you can imagine, other companies are likely doing that as well. And then with regard to responding to disinformation, Google and other tech companies have said, they will not allow Russian media or official media sources, et cetera, to use their platforms to spread information about the war.
Given that cyber warfare is part of the battlefield now, I am curious if there's any precedent for what we're going through right now. What should we anticipate might happen in future conflicts?
In a sense, any attack is going to be kind of a proving ground, an opportunity or occasion to assess the possibilities for cyber attack, both now and in the future. So you can imagine that cybersecurity specialists, certainly government agencies, are paying close attention to the ways in which Russia and others are using cyber attacks as part of their larger attack strategy, and as well, of course, measures that the United States, its allies, and private companies, to the extent they're participating in some of this, are taking. The other thing is Ukraine has issued an invitation for individuals, hackers, programmers, right, to launch their own series of attacks on Russian interests. And this might mark for the future that we might see, because of the ability of individuals or swarms of folks, if you want to put it that way, to enter into these kinds of conflicts. And as you can imagine, that's quite concerning. Which means then that the assessments that countries will be making as they're trying to figure out how to respond to attacks, as well as how to hold others responsible, are going to be much more difficult. because there's always this possibility that someone outside of a government or official channels are responsible for that attack.
Yeah, a lot going on and some really complex issues here. Mark Chinen, really appreciate your time and your insight into this. Thanks.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Mark Chinen is a professor at Seattle University School of Law. Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Jenny Cecil Moore produced today's show. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.
Hi there. One more thing. This year marks 70 years of KUOW keeping you informed and connected. As we look forward to the next 70 years, we'd love to hear from you and learn about what KUOW means to you and why public radio matters. Call 206-897-1303 to leave a quick message or visit KUOW.org/testimonials to learn more.